My dad slammed his palm on the dining table so hard the silverware jumped, and my mom didn't even flinch. After dessert, he said, staring straight at me, "You're going to sign the papers so your brother can use your building, and then you're moving back into your old room. This isn't up for debate." My brother's wife smirked over her glass of red wine. The roast chicken smell suddenly made me nauseous. That was the moment at dinner in my parents' house in Rochester, New York, when they tried to hand my future to my brother. My name is Lena Morales. I was 30 years old when that dinner blew my whole life open. Before I tell you what I did next, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what you would have done if your parents pulled this on you. I stared at the man who taught me to ride a bike in that same driveway outside the man who used to tape my drawings on the fridge like they were museum pieces. Now his face was tight, already decided. Dad, what papers I finally managed. My mom slid a manila envelope across the table like we were in some cheap legal drama instead of Sunday dinner. "Daniel's restaurant needs a new line of credit," she said, soft but firm. "The bank will approve it if you pledge your little apartment building as collateral. You're single. No kids. You don't need all that space." Nicole, my sister-in-law, dabbed her mouth with a napkin and added, "You'll stay here for a while. It's not like you have much going on besides work anyway." Heat crept up my neck. "I bought that building," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "with my own savings. I live there." My dad snorted. "You live in one unit and rent two. Daniel's got a whole staff depending on him." "Be serious, Lena. Family sacrifices for family." That line, "family sacrifices for family," was the Morales family motto whenever Daniel needed anything from the time we were teenagers. It never seemed to apply the other way. My older brother just sat there, expression carefully neutral, but his hand rested on the envelope like it already belonged to him. "Look," he said, "this loan will stabilize the restaurant. We'll refinance later, pay off the line, and you'll be fine. Stop being dramatic." I looked around the table at the framed pictures on the wall where Daniel's achievements always took center stage: football trophies, graduation plaques, the photos from his glamorous wedding. My high school honor roll certificate was tucked on a smaller wall by the hallway, half hidden by a fake plant. "And if I don't sign?" I asked. Mom's jaw tightened. "Don't start. Your brother has been under so much stress keeping that place open. You know how hard he works." Dad cut in, voice low and clipped. "If you walk out of here without signing, don't expect us to be here for you when you finally realize you made a mistake. We raised you. We paid for college. Now it's your turn to give back." Nicole murmured, "Honestly, Lena, it's selfish not to help." Something in me cracked, but it didn't shatter the way they expected. I pushed my chair back slowly, the legs scraping on their polished hardwood floor. "So that's it," I said. "My place becomes Daniel's safety net, and I move back into my childhood bedroom like I'm 16 again." My dad bristled. "Watch your tone." My mom folded her hands. "Your brother is building something. You just go to work and collect a paycheck." That stung more than I wanted to admit. I'd spent 8 years at a regional bank downtown specializing in commercial credit risk. I understood building something, just in a different way. "I'm not signing anything tonight," I said. "I'm going home." Daniel muttered "unbelievable" under his breath. My mom's voice followed me down the hall. "You are going to regret this, Lena." The cold March air slapped my face when I stepped off their porch, but it felt cleaner than the air at that table. I drove the 15 minutes back to my brick triplex near Park Avenue on autopilot, fingers gripping the steering wheel so hard they cramped. That building represented every overtime shift, every skipped vacation, every decision to cook instead of going out. I'd bought it 3 years earlier, moved into the top unit, and rented the other two to grad students. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Back in my living room, I kicked off my boots and sat on the couch in the dark, listening to the old radiators hiss. They wanted me to sign over my leverage, my stability, for Daniel's second attempt at being a restaurant star. And the worst part was I had a sinking feeling this wasn't just about one loan. It was about the pattern I'd let them build on my back for years. Sleep was pointless, so by sunrise, I was in the shower, then in my car, then in the parking garage downtown, moving on pure, stubborn momentum. I worked on the sixth floor of Lakeview Federal in credit risk, where numbers didn't care about family stories. Around 10, I knocked on the open door of my former manager, now Senior VP Eric Dunham. Got a minute? I asked. He looked up, took in my face, and gestured to the chair. For you, always. What's going on? I closed the door behind me, suddenly aware that I was about to invite my work life into my family mess. I need to understand my exposure on something I said. Personally, off the record. His expression sharpened in that banker way I knew well. Okay, tell me what you're worried about. I laid it out. Daniel's restaurant, Nicole's big dreams, the original small business loan I'd co signed 2 years back because my parents had insisted it was just a formality. How they now wanted me to pledge my building for a new line. Eric's fingers flew across his keyboard as he pulled up public records and our bank's internal notes. All right, he said slowly. The restaurant's LLC has an existing term loan with us that you guaranteed. Payments were on time at first, but they've been late 3 out of the last 5 months. They're on a watch list. My stomach dropped. And my guarantee? You're on the hook if they default, he said. Also, they've maxed 2 business credit cards, and I'm seeing inquiries from a couple of online lenders, merchant cash advance companies. That's usually a bad sign. Debt to income ratio is ugly. I swallowed hard. So if they go under, my credit gets trashed, and they could come after my assets. Eric nodded. Potentially, yes. Especially if any of those merchant advances end up with judgments. And if somebody at another bank convinced you to put a lien on your building, they'd be first in line. He paused. Lena, why are they suddenly pushing you now? I thought of the envelope, my dad's tone, my mom's eyes sliding past me to Daniel. Because nobody else will lend to them, I said quietly. Eric didn't argue. Look, he said, as a guarantor, you have rights. You can request full financials, you can try to negotiate a release if they refinance without you. If you want, I can print you a full exposure summary. I nodded, throat tight. Do it. And Eric, please keep this between us. Back at my desk, I stared at the report he'd handed me, the numbers turning into a timeline of every time Daniel had stepped into a hole and dragged us with him. I flashed back to when I was 21, and he borrowed my savings to cover his last semester at Syracuse, promising to pay me back as soon as he got a real job. I'd picked up extra shifts at the campus cafe and quietly forgave the debt when he forgot. When he wanted a flashy car for his first sales job, my dad had co-signed and then called me in tears 6 months later when the repo guy came. I'd written a check to make the arrears vanish because my mom said it would kill my dad's blood pressure to see his credit ruined. When Daniel and Nicole got married, I covered the photographer, the flowers. The honeymoon flights, almost $15,000 altogether, because you're good with money, you'll make it back. Every time, family sacrifices for family. By the time my lunch break rolled around, anger had replaced the shaky hurt. I texted my friend Jenna, who worked at a law firm a couple blocks away. Do you still know that business attorney you mentioned? The one who hates people getting taken advantage of. She responded almost immediately. Monica. She's a shark. Want me to see if she has time today? An hour later, I sat across from attorney Monica Blake in a small conference room that smelled faintly of coffee and copier toner. I spread out Eric's report, the original loan documents, and the blank forms my parents had tried to slide under my nose. Monica read quietly, occasionally humming in that way lawyers do when something is worse than they expected. Here's the deal, she said finally. You are already overexposed. If you pledge your building, they're tying a rock to your ankles and asking you to jump in after them. She walked me through my rights as a guarantor. I could demand full financial statements from Daniel's LLC, including tax returns. If they'd gotten any new credit using my guarantee without informing me, that could be grounds to challenge it. If they ever tried to forge my signature on anything involving my property, that would be criminal. She explained that the restaurant carried general liability and workers' compensation through a local agency. I think that's run by a guy named Gordon Reeves, she said, flipping through an online directory. If they're behind on premiums, that's a huge red flag. And health permits in the city are overseen by an office headed by someone named Allison Kerr. Restaurants depend on staying in good standing with her. Monica wasn't suggesting anything illegal. She was just pointing out where the fault lines already ran. My advice, she finished, do not sign a thing and start thinking about how to get yourself out of existing guarantees. As if the universe wanted to test my resolve, immediately my mom called while I was still standing outside Monica's building. Hi, mija, she said, using the term like a soft bandage. Your father and I talked. We'll have the notary come over tomorrow night so we can sign everything here. It'll just be family at dinner. We'll make enchiladas. My chest tightened. I told you I'm not comfortable with this, I said. She sighed dramatically. You have always made things so difficult. Daniel is drowning and you're standing on the shore counting your money. I didn't raise you to be cold. Once that line would have crushed me into apologizing. This time I heard Monica's voice in my head, describing tying a rock to your ankles. I'll think about it, I said, then hung up before she could launch into another speech. That night, instead of spiraling, I logged into the online portal for the credit monitoring service tied to the accounts I'd guaranteed and watched the alerts roll in like a storm radar. The pattern was worse than Eric's snapshot had suggested. In the past 60 days, there had been multiple inquiries from high-interest lenders, 2 new cash advances, and a late notice from the city about overdue restaurant property taxes. I printed everything and started a folder. Then I emailed Monica and asked her to draft a formal letter invoking my rights as guarantor, requesting full financials from Daniel's LLC and putting them on notice that I did not consent to any further obligations tied to my building. The next morning, Daniel blew up my phone with missed calls before I even got to my office. When I finally picked up, he didn't bother with hello. What the hell is this letter? He demanded. You're threatening legal action against me? I took a breath. I'm protecting myself, I said. I want to see your numbers before anyone asks me to risk my home. He laughed harshly. Lena, we just need $20,000. You make that in what, a year? You're being ridiculous. No, I said, surprising both of us with how firm it sounded. I'm not giving you $20,000, and I'm not pledging my building. Silence exploded on the line. You don't mean that? He said eventually. Mom said I don't care what Mom said, I cut in. I'm done writing blank checks. He hung up on me. 10 minutes later, Nicole texted paragraphs about how I hated seeing Daniel succeed and how she hoped I was happy watching us lose everything. I turned my phone face down and walked to Eric's office. Assume I want to minimize further damage, I told him. What can we do together? We flagged Daniel's accounts for heightened review, making sure no new credit could piggyback on my name without my explicit consent. Eric reminded me again that I wasn't sabotaging them. I was simply refusing to let them quietly drag me under. Still, I knew there were other angles they could try, so I decided to get ahead of those too. That afternoon, with Monica's blessing, I called the insurance office listed on Daniel's original loan paperwork and asked for Gordon Reeves. I'm a guarantor on a commercial loan secured in part by a restaurant policy you handle, I said when he came on the line. Before I agree to anything new, I need to understand risk. He didn't violate any privacy rules, but he was surprisingly forthcoming about general conditions. Small restaurants are struggling, he said. We've had a few who've fallen behind on premiums. When that happens, we're required to notify the health department and sometimes the landlord, depending on the policy. When I mentioned the restaurant's name, he paused just long enough for my stomach to clench. Let's just say they're a couple of payments behind and one claim away from a serious problem, he said carefully. After we hung up, I found the number for the city's licensing and inspections office and asked for Allison Kerr, introducing myself as a potential investor considering backing the business. We talked in general terms at first about how Rochester monitored food safety and how repeat violations were handled. As soon as I mentioned the restaurant, her tone cooled. We've had some concerns, she said. Nothing catastrophic yet, but they've had a couple of minor violations roll into follow up inspections, and we've warned them that another serious issue could result in a suspension. We take public safety very seriously. I thanked her, hung up, and sat there staring out my office window at the Genesee River, thinking about all the little cracks in Daniel's carefully curated story of being a visionary chef held back by the haters. I didn't need to invent problems. They existed already. All I had done was shine a brighter light on them by asking the right questions as someone whose financial life was on the line. Over the next 10 days, my phone buzzed regularly with credit alerts, new loan applications filed, then denied over and over as Daniel scrambled for anybody willing to lend. Within about 2 weeks, they'd already tried 3 different banks and 2 online lenders. As a guarantor on the existing loan, I was automatically notified of any inquiries involving my name or the business. Each denial chipped away at the story my parents clung to, that one more chance would fix everything. During that same stretch, Allison's office scheduled a routine follow up inspection at the restaurant for later in the month. That was standard, I knew, based on their prior minor violations. But this time, health and insurance were intersecting in a way Daniel couldn't skate past with charm. Gordon's office had already sent a notice about their overdue premiums, which meant their coverage was flagged. When the inspector finally walked through the kitchen a couple of weeks later and saw a malfunctioning fridge and a gap in documented training, the report triggered an automatic temporary closure until they could correct everything and prove coverage. I didn't find out from Daniel. I found out from the hand-lettered "closed for maintenance" sign taped crookedly to their front door. I saw that sign because I was sitting in a coffee shop across the street after work nursing a latte and pretending to scroll my phone while my stomach twisted. Through the big restaurant windows, I watched staff trickle out holding to-go containers and looking shell-shocked. Nicole came out last, phone pressed to her ear, eyes bright with tears, as she gestured helplessly toward the closed sign. Daniel stood a few feet away, hands on his hips, face red with frustration as he argued with what looked like the landlord. It should have made me feel triumphant. Instead, it felt like watching a slow-motion car crash you'd been warning people about for miles. Within a few days of the shutdown, an email from the bank confirmed what I already knew was coming. The restaurant loan was officially in default, and as guarantor, I would be contacted about options. Monica and I got ahead of it, drafting a proposal that would settle my portion by redirecting some savings but protecting my building. My parents called in a fury as soon as the news reached them. "What did you do?" my mom demanded, voice shaking. "Daniel says you've been talking to his bank and his landlord and God knows who else." I kept my voice level. I talked to my bank and my lawyer. I asked questions as a guarantor whose name is on a defaulted loan. That's all. My dad jumped in angrier than I'd heard him in years. "You destroyed your brother's life because you were jealous of him," he shouted. "You couldn't stand seeing him own a business while you sit behind a desk." I almost laughed at how upside down that was. "He destroyed his business by running it into the ground," I said. All I did was refuse to follow him off the cliff. The call ended with my mom sobbing that I was not the daughter she thought she raised, and my dad declaring that if Daniel goes down, it's on your conscience. A few days later, there was a knock at my door that had the desperate rhythm of people who'd been pacing outside rehearsing a speech. I looked through the peephole and saw Daniel and Nicole on my small front stoop, shoulders hunched against the wind. I considered not answering, but avoiding them wouldn't change anything. I opened the door halfway, blocking the entrance with my body. "What do you want?" I asked. Nicole's mascara had smudged under her eyes. Daniel looked like he hadn't slept. "Can we come in?" he asked. 5 minutes. I stepped back more out of old habit than desire to help. They perched on the edge of my thrift store couch, looking small for the first time in my life. "We need $30,000, Daniel said without preamble. That's the number it'll take to get the restaurant reopened and pay off the worst of the stuff. After that, we can regroup. Nicole jumped in. We'll sign whatever. We'll put your name on the business. We're begging you, Lena. I took a breath, feeling a strange calm settle over me. How much do you actually owe? I asked. Daniel blinked. I just told you 30? No, I said. Total. Between loans, cards, vendors' taxes, everything. Don't guess. You know the number. His eyes flicked to the folder in my hands as I laid it on the coffee table and opened it. Eric's summary, Monica's letters, the credit alerts, a printout of the county's lien notifications. Because according to everything I've seen, you're looking at closer to $200,000. Nicole's mouth dropped open. You went digging, she said, voice rising. You spied on us. I'm on the loan, I said. This isn't spying. It's called paying attention. Daniel's shoulders sagged as he glanced over the pages. We just needed time, he said weakly. If you'd signed like Mom and Dad asked, we could have refinanced and bought time. That's why you tried to start an appraisal on my building behind my back, I asked quietly. His head snapped up. I pulled out another paper, an inquiry notice from a lender I'd never contacted referencing my property's address. Eric had flagged it for me with a sticky note. Did you authorize this? I slid it across the table. Someone gave them my information, I said. Used my building's address. My best guess, Mom and Dad pushed you to get the process started, so it would be harder for me to say no later. Daniel didn't deny it. That hurt more than I'd expected. We were going to tell you, he muttered. You always overthink things. We were just moving things along. Nicole stood abruptly. I cannot believe you, she said. You're sabotaging us and then acting like some hero for not letting us drag you down. Who does that to family? I felt something inside me harden into clarity. You did, I said, looking from her to Daniel. You sat at Mom and Dad's table and watched them tell me I had to give up my home, move back into my old room, and turn everything I've worked for into your safety net. You said nothing. You thought I'd roll over like always. I flipped to the front page of the folder where I'd handwritten a timeline starting with that dinner. From the moment Dad slid that envelope across the table, I knew I had to look at the numbers instead of the guilt. I talked to my bank, my lawyer, the insurance agent. Your policy is with the city official who monitors your permits. I didn't make any of your problems up. I just stopped letting you hide them under my name. Daniel's face went from pale to flushed. So you're just going to watch us lose everything, he said, his voice cracking for the first time. Yes, I said. I am. The words landed in the room like a dropped plate. I am not giving you $30,000. I am not signing any more guarantees. I am not risking my building or my future for a business that is already sinking. If the bank comes after me, I'll work with them directly and I'll use every legal option Monica can find to limit the damage. But I will not bail you out. Nicole stared at me like she was seeing a stranger. You're heartless, she whispered. You'll die alone in this stupid little apartment building. I shrugged. Better alone than bled dry. Daniel stood slowly, shoulders hunched. Mom and Dad will never forgive you, he said. You know that, right? I met his eyes. They already chose you over me a long time ago. All I'm doing now is choosing myself. I opened the door and stepped aside. They walked out without another word. The next few months played out almost exactly the way the numbers had predicted. The health department didn't allow the restaurant to reopen until they proved full compliance and reinstated their insurance, which they never managed to do. The landlord filed suit for unpaid rent and secured a judgment. With their credit shredded and my guarantees locked down, Daniel and Nicole had no way to restructure. They filed for personal bankruptcy by the end of the year. Their house in the suburbs went on the market in a bank-ordered sale. My parents treated each new piece of news like fresh evidence that I'd cursed the family. They called, texted, even showed up outside my building twice, pounding on the door and yelling about how I destroyed your brother's legacy. I didn't answer. I installed a security camera and sent Monica every harassing message just in case. Eventually, even their fury ran out of steam. People sometimes imagine that cutting off your family feels like dramatic fireworks and immediate freedom. For me, it felt like grief and migraines, and staring at my phone thumb hovering over block for longer than I'd like to admit. But I did it. I blocked my parents, my brother, and Nicole on my phone and on every social platform. When Christmas rolled around, instead of forcing myself to sit at my parents' table under a cloud of resentment, I drove to my cousin Marco's house in Buffalo. Marco and his wife had always treated me like more than a backup daughter. We ate lasagna around a noisy table, their kids running in circles, and nobody asked me for money or hinted that I owed them my future. When they toasted chosen family, I felt something unclench in my chest that had been tight for years. In the 2 years since that dinner in my parents' dining room, my life has become smaller in some ways and infinitely bigger in others. I still live in my triplex, but now all 3 units are renovated, rented, and cash flowing. After navigating my own mess, I left Lakeview Federal and started a financial consulting practice that helps women business owners understand lending and boundaries before they sign anything. Jenna sends me clients who come in saying things like, "My brother wants me to co sign his loan. What do you think?" And we both try not to laugh. My parents, Daniel and Nicole, are ghosts that only enter my life when a distant relative slips and mentions them. Supposedly, my parents moved to Florida to be near Nicole's family. Daniel works at some chain restaurant as a manager now. Maybe they blame me for everything. Maybe they've rewritten history so they were the victims all along. I honestly don't care. I don't forgive them. That's the part people sometimes stumble over when I tell this story. They want a neat bow, a deathbed apology, a holiday reconciliation, but no amount of therapy or self help quotes can change the fact that my parents were willing to sacrifice my home, my stability, and my future so their golden child could get one more spin at the wheel. Daniel and Nicole were willing to risk my credit and my property without even giving me honest numbers. I learned something from that, and I'm not unlearning it. I learned that family who sees you as a resource will drain you until you are empty. I learned that boundaries without consequences are just suggestions. And I learned that I would rather be called heartless than hand my life over to people who think love is measured in how much you're willing to lose for them. If you're listening to this and hearing echoes of your own dinner table, let this be your sign. You are allowed to say no even to the people who raised you. You are allowed to walk away. Thanks for sticking with my story. Share your thoughts below. What would you do if your parents tried to give your future away over dinner?